what's the purpose of the enemy in doing a lot of this stuff? Is it that he just wants to corrupt humanity to take as many down? If he can alter the DNA of humans, if he can find a way to turn humanity into Nephilim, find another way. In Genesis 6, it was procreation. It was that co-mingling. But what if there's another way to alter DNA of humans, to corrupt it? Then he can prevent salvation from happening. All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Tat2d Preacher podcast. This is episode 32. Hope you are all doing awesome today. Now, in this episode, it's going to be part 2 of what we began in the previous episode, where we were looking at the days of Noah and the days of Lot. Jesus said in Matthew 24:37, he says, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." And so what we're looking at is Jesus makes this crazy statement where he says there's going to be things happening on the earth before he comes back that's going to be very similar to what was happening in the days of Noah. And so we kind of dove into that, and I'll give a brief recap in just a minute. But what I want to do in this episode is to then now bridge the gap into our time today. And so a lot of people think we're in the end times, the end's getting close. And so do we see some of the same things that were happening back in the days of Noah and in the days of Lot that we see today? Is there similarities? Is there some crossover? And so that's what I want to dive into today, is just look at what's happening in our world, because a lot of this stuff, maybe some of you have never heard, or some of you just think maybe, it's just a conspiracy. So we're going to get into that. I think it's super fascinating, and I think as Christians, it's super important to understand. So that's where we're going. But before we jump into that, just want to remind everyone, if you haven't yet, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, at the Tat2d Preacher, posting there 4 or 5 times a week now. So I'm trying to really grow that. I would appreciate all of your support. So subscribe if you haven't yet. And as well, you can follow me on Instagram and on TikTok. That's embarrassing. TikTok at the same handle, at the Tat2d Preacher, posting there daily. So go give your boy a follow. Yeah, and if you haven't yet, if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify, please give me a sweet review. That would just help me push the podcast out there. So that's it. Here we go, episode 32. So sit back, relax, enjoy. Okay, so by way of a quick recap, now I'm not going to do a deep dive into this recap if you missed episode 31. So I would encourage you, if you haven't listened to 31, stop. And I'm not just plugging that episode. It's just going to give you a lot of context into what we're talking about today, because this is like the next step down the road here. But there were 2 scriptures we looked at. Matthew 24:37. It says, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." In Luke 17:27-30, Jesus says, in describing the days of Noah, he says, people were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were being given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. In verse 28, it was the same as happened in the days of Lot. They were eating, they were drinking, they were buying, they were selling, they were planting, and they were building. But on the day that Lot left Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all.
and it will be the same on the day the Son of Man is revealed. And so Jesus makes these statements in speaking of the times that are preceding his return. What kind of things will be happening, what some of the things will be looking like. And so what we looked at is we looked at the days of Noah. We looked at what was actually happening in the days of Noah. Like what did that term actually mean? And because it wasn't just like 1 or 2 days, 1 or 2 weeks. I mean, Noah lived something like 600 years before the flood happened, and then another 300 plus years after the flood. And so in Noah's life, the days of Noah, that's like a 900-year period where a lot of stuff was happening and things that were leading up to the flood and then things that subsequently happened after the flood. But before I got to talking about the flood that we see in Genesis 6 and Genesis 7, Genesis 8, I started in Genesis 3 talking about the seed war. And this Genesis 3:15 is the absolute beginning point of the conflict in the Bible. This is the beginning point of spiritual warfare that we see between the devil and his entourage against God and his people. And this is the very famous first prophetic word in Scripture that speaks of Jesus, where we read God saying, I will make enemies of you and the woman, and of your offspring and her descendant. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. And we kind of dug into the language there, but basically it's talking about the offspring, the seed of the woman, meaning Christ, and then furthermore, Christ and his body, his church, his people, and then the seed of the serpent, the offspring of the snake. And so we see that this is the beginning point of the devil. He received this word from God saying someone's going to come, who's going to crush you on the head. And so he's like, all right, so I got to prevent that. And so the first kind of thing that we see after God gives him this curse is we see Genesis 6 and what happened in Genesis 6, where the sons of God came to earth, mated with human women, creating a hybrid race called the Nephilim. So we see right here the devil in his mission to corrupt the genome, to corrupt the bloodline. Because you see, his plan was, how do I prevent this one who's going to come and crush my head? How can I prevent that from happening? Well, if I can taint the bloodline of humanity, then I can prevent this one from coming to take me out. And so we see Genesis 6, we see him corrupting the bloodline, creating a hybrid race, and it got so bad that it affected the human race, the animal kingdom, and it spread everywhere to the point where it was only Noah and his family that were left who were not contaminated, whose bloodline was pure. And so this is what actually preceded the flood. This is why God sent the flood. It wasn't that people were just sinning really bad. You know, people have been sinning really bad since Cain and Abel. Since Cain killed Abel way back at the very beginning, people have been sinning really bad. So it wasn't that. There was something different that happened. Something that caused God to then be like, I got to wipe everything out. And so we looked at how the angels, they came, they mated with human women, creating the Nephilim. They corrupted the animal kingdom, creating these weird, divine animal hybrids. Then they were mixing animal with animal, creating these abominable creatures that we see a lot in mythology and folklore. And then they were also teaching man forbidden knowledge. And I'll get into that a little bit more in what we're talking about today. But they were teaching them forbidden knowledge, occult wisdom. They were teaching them basically how to sin on steroids, they were perverting the knowledge that they had learned from God, and they had perverted that knowledge into how to basically destroy themselves and corrupt themselves. And so that's what we see the days of Noah, and then we get into Sodom and Gomorrah, very famous story. The traditional reading of that story is that, homosexuality was rampant, that it says in Ezekiel where the people there, they were just very prideful, they were very greedy, they weren't taking care of the poor. And so God decides, because of these things happening, I'm going to obliterate that city off the map. And this is typically how it's looked at, but when we do a deep dive into the story, it wasn't just homosexuality that was happening, though it wasn't just the fact that they were neglecting the poor, that they were greedy, that they, were not a good communities of people that were just sinning really bad. But we see the example there with the two angels and how the men of the city wanted to basically come out and they wanted to rape these angels. They wanted to sleep with them. And what is that about? And so we see that's the same kind of stuff that was happening before the flood. This violation of the bounds of the unseen realm and our natural realm, and how they can't commingle, they can't coexist. And when things like that happen, this is where God draws the line. And so we saw similar stuff happening before the flood. We see it happening in Sodom and Gomorrah. And so that caused God to be like, yo, this is done. I'm going to obliterate this city. I got to prevent this from spreading. And so God judges it. Something was happening that precipitated the flood, that precipitated the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. And that was this commingling between divine and human. That was this experimentation and violation of the genome and of God's created order. And so all those things were happening, and God was like, no more. I got to step in. I got to do something. And so that's what we see, these judgments happening. And then that's what Jesus said was going to happen before his return again. That as it was in the days of Noah, in the days of Lot, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. And so as we then now transition to today, how do we bridge the gap and connect what happened then, or what was happening then, to now? Do we see similar things happening now? And as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not going to drag this episode out, because I could make this a 3-hour episode easy if we went down all of these rabbit holes for all of these different things I'm going to point out. But so instead of doing that, I'm going to look at some of these areas from just a high vantage point and just prime the pump, so to speak. And then in the upcoming episodes, we're going to dive deep into a lot of these individually, because some of them are connected, but some of them are distinct and they're different, and they just merit, I think, their own time and attention, because I think that we can learn a lot more doing it that way. So when we look at our culture today and we see the kinds of things that are happening, do we see similar things that were happening back in the days of Noah? Is this co-mingling event still happening? Are Nephilim still being created? Is there still this violating of the created order happening? Are angels still messing with the genome? Or is Satan still messing with the genome? Is he still trying to corrupt things? Because in reality, his first plan bombed. Jesus came, Jesus crushed his head. We have the cross. So that plan bombed. But so he had to shift plans. If he couldn't prevent Christ from coming, and doing what he did, then is there a way for him to either prevent him from coming again, second time, or is there a way for him to basically come up with a way to take down as many people with him, to then be like, all right, you know what? I'm going to corrupt as many people as I can corrupt. I'm going to prevent as many people as I can prevent from ever spending eternity with God. Has his plan shifted that way? And I think you could, on one level, definitely say 100% that's what he's doing. But there's also a lot of talk about this end times battle that's going to happen, this war. And there's a lot of people speculate that he's building an army, and he's not just trying to corrupt the genome just like he did before the flood, but he's also trying to create a race of people, an army, for the end times battle of Armageddon. And so how do we see that playing out? Is the fact that he's creating this army, can we see signs of that here in our day today? And so I would say the first kind of hint of that has to do with the whole aliens and alien abduction phenomenon that we have. And I did a whole episode of this a few episodes ago, talking about how this isn't just some conspiracy anymore, but there's literally tens of thousands of documented cases of this, of people having these abduction experiences. And there's tens of thousands of sightings of UFOs. And I mean, I went through all of this stuff, so I'm not going to go into all that today. But one part I want to highlight is their hybridization program that has been going on for decades, where they're trying to, part of the reason for the abductions is they're taking humans and they're messing with our DNA. They're trying to create alien human hybrids. They're trying to take an egg and a sperm, and they're trying to mix it with this alien biologic. I don't even know what you would call it. A lot of people think aliens are just demons. I don't hold to that view. I think that they're their own separate entity. So they're trying to create this alien human hybrid. And they're trying to basically infiltrate our society. Now, when I look at that, that's very similar. That's very, very similar to Genesis 6 and this whole creating of the Nephilim race, this hybrid race trying to infiltrate society. And so I think that there's a lot going on with that I think is way more complex than I even know or understand. But I think when you look at this whole hybridization thing and you look at Genesis 6, to me, it just smells like the same thing. Could be repackaged different. The procedures and the protocols and what they're trying to do, maybe not exactly how it was back then, but all the end result is still the same. They're trying to create a hybrid race. And that's why we have this abduction phenomenon. That's why, when you look at all of the data of these abductions, that's why a lot of it is about the reproductive system, reproduction in general, because they're trying to figure that out. They're trying to figure out creation, how to create another being, another entity, another race, whatever. And they're messing with our genome, mixing it with theirs, which is just like what was happening. And so I think that's kind of the first marker that we see that very much relates to Genesis 6, very much relates to Genesis 18 and 19 with Sodom and Gomorrah. This co-mingling, this mixing that God never intended. And so if this is happening, this definitely has God's attention, and this is what precipitated the flood. And then we also have, and I alluded to this briefly, this satanic creation of Nephilim. Now, what do I mean by that? When you look at the occult and you look at satanic ritual abuse, and there's many factions, there's many camps in the occult. It's not all the exact same. But when you look at a lot of those rituals and you look, especially like the really dark, sinister, evil factions of Satanism, you will, and as I alluded to in the last episode with the example of Anton LaVey's daughter, who, for those of you who don't know who Anton LaVey is, he was like the leader of the Satanic Church. And this dude was jacked up, and he had his daughter, and the whole purpose of her existence, they were grooming her whole childhood, like involving her in the most horrific, disgusting, evil rituals and ceremonies, and having acts done to her that would just turn your stomach, but grooming her to become so defiled so that she can be impregnated by Satan himself to birth his own offspring, which a lot of people think that this is how the Antichrist is going to come. And this is what I believe, that the Antichrist is going to be an angel hybrid, but the angel being Satan himself. And so we see that happening. And then if you've heard of the Blurry Creatures podcast, and I would recommend this podcast, it's probably one of my favorite podcasts right now. And they look at all the paranormal stuff from every angle and perspective that you can think of, but they do it all from a Christian biblical worldview. And so it's really blowing up, and it's got a lot of awesome, interesting, mind-blowing discussions on it. But they had one episode where they interviewed this girl that they called Elle. I had to listen to the episode 3 times, and I still can't mentally process what I heard. But this woman, her whole birth, and the things that were happening to her as a young girl, and I mean, she was saying stories of how she'd be taken into these cave systems where these super demonic satanic rituals were happening, and she would see these men, and they would shapeshift into these creatures, and then they would be, which she called as Nephilim, and then they would rape her. And like this stuff that she said she experienced and the things that she saw, I mean, you got to go check it out. But this is what's happening as well today. This insane defilement, again, of breaking that boundary between the unseen realm and our realm, where you're having humans shapeshift into other creatures, and then you're having them intermingle with humanity. And then you have this whole practice of demonic entity or fallen angel, Nephilim, interbreeding with humanity. This is what was happening before the flood. This is what was happening Sodom and Gomorrah. It's happening today. And so this is what precipitated the flood. This is what precipitated God's wrath and his justice on the world. And so you have that whole kind of branch of it happening all over the world. And that's just 2 examples of who knows how many. I mean, when you listen to her story, man, there's a ton of things that she saw and kids that she saw. And yeah, so I encourage you to go listen to that. And then we also have giants that are still allegedly around today. And so we talked about how this Nephilim, that the progeny of fallen angels mating with human created the Nephilim, that these were the giants of old. And we see it all over the earth. Large bones have been found, large skeletons have been found. I mean, these are, everyone speculates how tall they actually got, but some say, 7 feet, 8 feet, up to 20 feet higher. Who knows? But the point is, these are the giants, and there are modern day accounts, not just of really tall people. The tallest man in the world, I think, was I forget that dude's name. His name was Robert something. He was like 8 feet 11 or something. Not just a tall guy, but these are tall, freakishly tall beings, but have the mobility and the agility of like a 5'10" running back in the NFL. So like a 15-foot built, jacked dude with the speed and the agility of like a 5'10" running back. Like, these are not just tall beings, but these are freaks of nature, literally. And so they're who Israel in the promised land, Joshua led Israel into Canaan, and all those wars that happened where they had to obliterate all those tribes and clans, those were all giant clans. And when you like actually dig into, do some research on each one of those clans, that's what you'll discover. God told Israel, wipe them out, not just because they were really bad humans kind of living in Israel's territory, but they were giant clans. They were hybrid races that God never intended to be created. So he said, take them out. And then the most famous one in the Bible is Goliath. He was another giant. And so there's modern day accounts. And one of the most famous ones that I've heard about 6 or 7 years ago that there's a ton of information on. This is not just, one random story from some random person. It's the Kandahar giant, I think over in Afghanistan, where a bunch of U.S. troops, can't remember the story exactly, they came in, they were in front of this cave, and then out came this red-haired, literal giant, and they took like 6 or 7 guys to fill it with a whole bunch of bullets to finally put the thing down. And then there's the whole conspiracy of, what happened with the body. And then, a lot of people think that the U.S. government took it and then they hid it. And then there's other military accounts where, U.S. troops over there in the Middle East on their night stakeouts, and they're, on watch, and then they're looking through their infrared binoculars and just kind of scoping out the scene because it's super dark in the middle of the night there. And they see these things coming up on their infrared binoculars. And, creatures running up and down mountains that no human could do, and standing up, and they're as tall as the trees out there. And so it's just like there's crazy accounts. And there's literally hundreds and hundreds of them. And it's very easily accessible information. And so you have giants still existing today. And so again, giants existed before the flood. Giants existed after the flood. And so you have the flood happening. You have Sodom and Gomorrah, the judgment there. These were giant clans. That was a giant clan city. It's happening today still. And now the next area I want to look at is, we've all heard of CERN. And CERN is that large hadron collider over in Switzerland where basically they've created this thing where they're just smashing particles together at insane speeds. And I think the mainstream narrative is that they're trying to discover, new particles, new things that have never been discovered yet. But when you're looking at what they're trying to do, a lot of the conspiracy angle to that is they're trying to, create a portal. They're trying to open up a dimension. They're trying to smash these things together to create so much energy as to create an actual portal opening to a different dimension. Because when you look at CERN and outside of the facility, you have statues of pagan gods, and so there's a whole bunch of weird pagan satanic imagery associated with it. And so who knows what's really going on there? There's a lot of, again, a lot of speculation, but when you are messing with the elements in a ungodly fashion, and you're trying to create openings to different dimensions, you're violating the bounds of what God has established again, which God's not cool with. And so you have that happening today. And then what's connected to kind of all of those things, aliens and the alien abductions, the satanic creation of Nephilim, giants, and CERN, you have these deep underground military bases all over the world. And, you have Area 51, you have Raven Rock, you have the HARP research station, you have the apparent underground bases in Antarctica. I mean, you have all this stuff. And it's in these areas, because there's massive underground caverns, undiscovered caverns all over the world, like everywhere. I think the stat was only 5% of the caverns have actually been discovered and actually walked through by a human. And so you have these bases, and you have these underground caverns where a lot of this stuff supposedly happens. So this is kind of like, how do you hide all this stuff from the public? Well, you put them way down beneath the earth. And so this is where a lot of the alien aircraft is reverse engineered. This is where, a lot of the aliens that have been recovered by the U.S. government, this is where they're kept. And this is where the unimaginable experimentation happens, like I mentioned with that girl Elle, and caves and underground bases. This is where a lot of kids and a lot of people are kidnapped, and this is where they're taken down in these massive underground systems that are all over the earth. But again, that's a whole other episode in itself that I want to get into. But this is where a lot of this forbidden stuff is practiced, and this is where it happens in these bases. And then next, I want to talk about one of the things that the fallen angels, when they came to Earth and they mated with the human women, they also taught them forbidden knowledge. And so I want to get into alchemy. And I've recently been introduced to this, and but I'm definitely going to do, I think the next episode I'm going to do is going to be a deep dive into the study of alchemy. And basically, alchemy is the transformation or transmutation of matter and reality. And so this is where you get into, witchcraft and sorcery and magic and enchantment. And so the dictionary of deities and demons is a very dense scholarly work that basically goes through the Bible and picks out every mention of a demonic entity, a creature, and it defines it. It's a dictionary of all those terms. And so what they define as what these fallen angels did is they said that the Watchers, they imparted illicit revelation. So the Watchers is another term for fallen angels. The Watchers imparted illicit revelation about astrology, roots and spells, and the making of weapons. So that's what they taught humanity. And then another writer, he says this. He says the fallen angels taught their wives and children a variety of new technological skills, magical knowledge, and occult wisdom. And this suggests that psychic abilities and magical powers were originally an ancient inheritance from the angelic realm, from the fallen angels. This is that illicit occult wisdom that was taught, given to early humans. And then in the Luciferian tradition, branch of Satanism, this is known in spiritual and metaphorical terms as the witch blood, elven blood, or fairy blood that is possessed by witches and wizards. And then the Wycliffe Bible Encyclopedia defines a sorcerer as one who was said to have superhuman or occult power by virtue of spells, magic, or secret knowledge obtained from evil spirits. Okay, so basically that's what alchemy is. It takes matter and reality and it infuses it with witchcraft and sorcery to create, to alter, to transmute reality and matter. And I know it sounds very fantastical and it sounds crazy, but this is the kind of stuff this is the forbidden knowledge that when you look at groups like the Illuminati and the secret societies, this is that knowledge that is passed down. This is the knowledge that is sought out. This kind of stuff is what the angels taught humanity in Genesis 6. That it wasn't that they just taught them metallurgy, how to make, swords. They were teaching them how to take the materials, metal and all that stuff to create forbidden technology. It's not just these archaic weaponry, but high technological, advanced, ancient technology. And that they taught them how to take roots and herbs, basically how to take common herbs and plants and that kind of stuff to create magical potions, to create drugs, to create forbidden substances, if you will. This is the illicit revelation and knowledge that was given to humanity. And there is a lot of data and record of this happening today. This is what happens in satanic ritual abuse ceremonies and rituals. This is what's happening in a lot of New Age circles. This is what's happening in a lot of people are playing with this stuff. When you want to go down these conspiracy rabbit holes, I mean, this is what a lot of people were saying that Germany was doing in World War II. This technology, they were experimenting with stuff, and a lot of it has to do with this illicit, forbidden knowledge and magical knowledge and occult wisdom and magical powers and this ancient stuff that was taught to humanity that should never have been taught to humanity. And so this stuff is happening today. I mean, witches and wizards and sorcery and witchcraft and all this stuff, man. This is happening today, and this is what precipitated the flood. And then the final section is we see this whole transhumanism movement that's kind of hit the global stage. And basically, transhumanism is the position that human beings should be permitted to use technology to modify and enhance human cognition and bodily function, expanding abilities and capacities beyond current biological restraints. So on the outset, it doesn't seem like a bad thing, like you want to enhance the way our body works and blah, blah, blah. But when you dive into this, man, this is like, it's not just about enhancing. This is about like, how do we live forever? How do we basically create a humanity 2.0? And this is where you get into chips being implanted into us. This is where you get into cloning. This is where you get into artificial intelligence, nanotechnology. It's basically finding a way to upgrade the human species from where it is and trying to take it to an area that God never intended. It's trying to play God. Transhumanism is like literally trying to play God. You're trying to violate the bounds, the creative boundary that God has established. I mean, God is the creator of everything. And so this movement, which is connected to everything that I've already just said, but this idea where, no, as humans, no, we're our own gods, and we're going to create technology, and we're going to create systems that were going to cause us to live forever. And I heard one guy talk about this, and he said that, transhumanism is huge because it's the enemy's way, it's the devil's way of preventing the final meeting between humanity and their maker. They can live forever. If you never die, then you never have to stand before God. And so it's just this way of basically sticking it to God, saying, no, we're our own God. We're going to become our own creators. And and this is happening, and it's escalating very, very quick. And so, again, I'm going to dive deeper into that in an upcoming episode, because it's something that's going to become more and more mainstream as time goes on. And so those are the different areas that I think maybe not be exactly what was happening in Genesis 6, but they're very much connected. The messing with the genome, the violation of the boundaries of the unseen realm and humanity, where God was like, I got to step in and stop this, because they crossed the line. It's you see this desire to create in an ungodly fashion, and this is what led to that judgment, and it's still happening. And we can speculate on, what's the purpose of the enemy in doing a lot of this stuff. Is it that he just wants to corrupt humanity to take as many down? If he can alter the DNA of humans, if he can find a way to turn humanity into Nephilim, find another way. In Genesis 6, it was procreation. It was that co-mingling. But what if there's another way to alter DNA of humans, to corrupt it? Then he can prevent salvation from happening. He can turn humanity into, and that's a whole other crazy topic, and that's what we'll get into with transhumanism. But we see that it all connects back to the days of Noah, that same spirit, that same demonic mission and objective. And so as Christians, what should our response be to this? So what? Like, this is happening. What do we do with this? Well, my main reason for doing this episode and talking about this stuff is because, number one, we don't really hear it in church. Because if Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, typically in church, that just means, people were just carrying on as life as usual, and then all of a sudden, boom, Jesus shows up. People were just getting married, they were eating, they were drinking, life is just normal, and then boom. And I just think that that's not what was happening in the days of Noah. You can say, well, then why didn't Jesus go into all this when he said that? And I think that he didn't have to say that, because they knew what he meant. His audience knew what the days of Noah were like. And so they knew that when he said that was part of their normal life. What the days of Noah were like, what the days of Lot was like. And so I think we need to be aware of this stuff. We need to see it, because a lot of Christians, man, if you're not aware of what's going on, then it's going to be very easy to become deceived, to walk around super naive and just unclear. And how can we have discussions with the world? How can we have discussions with unbelievers about this kind of stuff if we don't even know what's going on ourselves? How can we have and give biblical understanding and biblical wisdom on addressing these things? Because what if they come out with a chip or some sort of technology that would help your life out and bring a lot more comfort and ease to it? Like, what if there was a way where you didn't have to carry around a cell phone, but you could just implant something in your head, and then it automatically turns into a phone? Like, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of this stuff could come out in a very nonchalant and undeceptive way, but it's like, do we really know what's going on? Do we really know the agenda behind it? And if you don't see this stuff, if you don't see what the enemy's been trying to do for thousands of years, and you see the agenda behind it, man, like, I think a lot of Christians could get deceived and corrupted, and they won't even know it. And that freaks me right out. That terrifies me. And so this is why I'm talking about this stuff. Because there is a satanic agenda out there. There are Christians getting abducted. There are these massive military bases where the most unimaginable things are happening there. Experimentation and creation. I mean, like, things that your mind couldn't process are happening. And so I want Christians to become aware, to be informed, to at least have enough understanding to be like, okay, I may not get it. It may make me very uncomfortable, but at least I'm aware of what's going on. Because right now, I think there's just so many Christians that are just completely oblivious. And when you're oblivious, you don't understand, and you have no knowledge, then you are ripe to becoming deceived. And so that's the purpose of this. But again, I basically just hit on some of these things and looked at it from a high perspective, but we're going to get into a lot of this in a deeper way in the upcoming episodes. So if this stuff interests you, then stick around. As I mentioned, I think I'm going to do Alchemy next. That subject is fascinating, and yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there on that. So I think that's where we're going to go next episode. But I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much for listening and or watching. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to leave them in the description below. You're watching this on YouTube. And feel free to, I don't know why I just gave a thumbs up there. That's annoying how it does that. I don't know how to turn that off. Anyways, thanks so much for watching the episode, listening to the episode, and have an awesome rest of your day, evening, and we'll see you all in the next one. Much love. God bless.